And with that, I want to thank you for that support, and I want to introduce the next part of the program. Because I told you I was going to move your head, then I was going to try to move your wallet. Now I promise to move your heart. And I tell you this because every single one of us have a blessing coming to us that you had no idea was coming. And in fact, as Muslims, you're going to learn tonight not only how powerful this religion is, how magnetic the faith is, but how incredibly powerful you are as a Muslim. Because Sister Lauren's going to give her journey to Islam, and she's not going to talk about how she debated somebody or how she read a book or how she argued religion or somebody gave dawah to her. She's not going to talk about that. She's going to talk about people she met and the interaction of how they treated each other led her to Islam, the ikhlas. The actions that we have in our own circle of influence can change the world. You have that power. You have that ability. You are going to learn tonight how powerful you can be to anybody that you come in contact with. Tonight we have Sister Lauren coming all the way from the United Kingdom in London. She's been a journalist. She's been a broadcaster. She's traveled the world. This woman is so blessed. She is here tonight to share her journey to Islam. Please welcome Sister Lauren Booth. Takbir.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Kullu wallahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yulid wa lam yulad, wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like to thank the Muslim Legal Fund of America for hosting me again on this journey. And I come over to America every month now, having made a vow 20 years ago never to come back to America because I found it a very difficult place to come. Since becoming Muslim, I've come here every single month, sometimes twice a month, to be supportive of the Muslim Legal Fund of America, because this is going to change the shape of our world if these laws go unchecked, make no mistake. But I'm here tonight to talk about one person's journey to Islam. Because I assure you, 2 years ago, if I had walked into this masjid in the corner of the room and looked at me standing here now in an abaya and a hijab, I would have said something like, "What did they do to you? Who got you? What happened?" Because I promise you, I was not going to be Muslim. It was not in my life plan. You know, we have all this arrogance now. We're encouraged to make 5-year plans. What's your 5-year plan? What's your 10-year plan? Islam was not anywhere near my plan. So I want to take you on a little journey today about how I come to be standing here, humbled before Allah and as your sister. So all good things begin at the beginning, so I'll start at the beginning myself. I was born in London, and I grew up in the 1970s in North London. My father was the actor Anthony Booth, and he was what we'd call a lapsed Catholic. Now, what does a lapsed Catholic mean? Well, in my dad's case, it meant that when he was very, very drunk, he would sing religious songs. That was his Catholicism. My mother was a superstitious Christian. So she would never go to church and she would never pray, but she would buy crosses and hang them around our flat in order to keep away evil spirits. Now, into this environment I was born, and I always remember praying. Some of my earliest memories, we can usually go back to when we're around 3, maybe 4 years old. I remember vividly sitting on my bed. I remember the yellow duvet, the sheet cover. And I'd sit there and I'd put my hands together and I would say the words, "Dear God." And then I'd give my little childish list of hopes and dreams. I even remember one of the prayers I used to make the most. And it was this: "Dear God, please take my younger sister away. She's horrible." Alhamdulillah, she's still with me and I like her more now. nobody really had to go into any detail about the fact that God existed. I just knew. I knew on a cellular level, I knew with absolute certainty that in my life as a little girl, God existed. The power in our life, in my life as a child, went. My father had a little bit of power. My mother had more power in the house. My grandfather had some power. My grandmother had a lot of power. And then above everybody was clearly God, who was making the world go round. But you know, in the secular West, how hard it is to hold on to what Allah calls in the Quran the rope of Iman. He tells us to hold tight to this, but it's very difficult. And so I began to slide off the rope of Iman as the years wore on. I remember at 10 years old, you start having sleepovers. So I had a friend come to stay at my house. And as I was about to go to sleep, I put my hands together and I said, "Dear God." And my friend looked at me like I was crazy. And she made that sound that girls make when they laugh at you. With the nose, you know. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm praying to God, of course." She said, "Oh, the guy on the cloud with the big beard, right?" And she laughed. And I thought, is God a guy on a cloud with a beard? What does God look like? I hadn't really thought about it. I'd just known that there was this power that I needed to submit to. But now he was like Santa Claus. And nobody had given me a form or a basis for that understanding. And that night I stopped praying. That night, it no longer made sense to me. And then, of course, you reach 11 years old, 12 years old, and that toxic mix of ego and hormones comes together in a catastrophic way. And I began to decide that I was the clever one. I was getting good grades at school because I was brilliant. I was pretty, how wonderful I was. And as my mum used to say to me, "You really do think the stars go round you, don't you?" And actually, for around 40 years, yes, I did. It wasn't just the teenage years. When you go off track and you slide off the rope of Iman, you go way off track and you become controlled by your ego, and that was me. Absolutely who I was. Now, what did I know about Islam growing up? Well, in the 80s at secondary school, there were only around 3 Muslim girls in my class, and they were in their group and we were in the white girl gang, and that was just how it was in London in the 80s. It was a very racist time. And I did observe the Muslim girls. And by watching them from a distance, I drew a series of conclusions about Islam that I held on to for many years. My first conclusion was that being Muslim means that girls have to grow their hair very, very long. The second conclusion was that Islam somehow makes girls very good at maths. I could never figure that out. And the third conclusion I made was that if you were a Muslim girl, you were definitely going to be either a doctor or a dentist. Again, I didn't know how that worked, but that's how it was. And the final conclusion I made was that Islam came from Pakistan. That was it. That, until 9/11, was the full basis of what I thought I knew about Islam. And I'd feel a lot more embarrassed about that if that isn't 1 or 2 things more than the average American or British person still knows. And yes, I know Islam didn't originate in Pakistan. It's very hard to hold on to the rope of Iman. And people want to know when you come to Islam, "Lauren, what is the moment then? What is the moment when you felt that God directed you on a different path than you thought you were on? What is the moment of awakening?" I've thought very long and hard about this, and it all comes down to the year 2000. And I was sitting in my living room watching the evening news, a very mundane scene. I had a 1-month-old baby, my first daughter, Alexandra. And on the news came a single picture that stopped the breath in my chest. I couldn't breathe all the time it was on the screen. And I'll describe it to you now. The picture showed the back of a young man who was 15 years old. He was wearing a t-shirt and jeans. And he was standing like this. And in his right hand, he had a stone. And he was just about to throw that stone. And I was fascinated because that 15-year-old boy looked so strong. He looked so mighty and so brave. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. And what really took my breath away was this. Just feet away from that 15-year-old boy was a tank, and it was pointing its gun at him. And somehow I knew that the men in that tank were more afraid of the boy, and that the boy had no fear of that tank. And I also felt, just from that image, the power in that stone. Now that boy's name was Faris Odeh. And Faris Odeh came from a place I'd never heard of called Gaza. And he came from a refugee camp in that place called Gaza that was called Rafah. And I want you all to hold on to that name, Rafah, because you'll hear it again later on. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but 9 days after that image appeared on our screens, Faris Odeh was shot dead by an Israeli sniper. He was shot in the neck, and he bled to death on the ground of his refugee camp home. He was shot for throwing stones at tanks. And the world didn't mourn, and everybody just moved on. But something had happened to my heart. And that is the only explanation I can give you, brothers and sisters, for everything that has happened next. Everything that I didn't plan for and had no idea was going to happen. In 2005, 5 years after I saw that picture, I walked into my editor's office at the Mail on Sunday newspaper. I was a successful journalist at the time. I had a full-page column, which is a bit like, it's the newspaper equivalent of being a Hollywood star, if I'm honest. If you've got your photo byline on a whole page of your words, that's it, you've made it. I had this. And I walked into my editor's office one day in January 2005 and said, Peter, I want to go to Palestine and cover the elections. Now, Peter Wright's a very intelligent man. He knew I wasn't a Middle East correspondent. He knew I wasn't a war correspondent. He knew I wasn't trained in any of those things, that I was writing mostly about travel and hairstyles and moving house and kids. But he said, okay, Lauren, here are your expenses. Go for 2 weeks to Palestine. We'll give you 4 pages in the magazine. And that was it. My flight was booked. A few days later, there I was, Tel Aviv airport. Now, when I arrived at Tel Aviv airport, I had a suitcase with me, and that got taken by Israeli security straight away. They do that just for fun when they suspect you're going to a Palestinian area, just to mess with you. But I didn't know that at the time. I just thought, wow, I've got no case. Now I'm standing there, I'm in the Middle East. I've got 4 names. Arab names that I can't even say properly on a bit of paper that are supposed to get me an interview with someone called Mahmoud Abbas or other. And I don't know even, listen, this is Tel Aviv. I don't even know how to get from Israel to Palestine. I'm completely confused. What have I got myself into? So as I'm standing there thinking, what have you done? A man comes up to me and he says this, hi, my name is Jamal. You can call me Jimmy. I say, hi, Jamal. He said, do you want a taxi? I said, yeah, I do. Where are you going? I said, Ramallah. Do you know it? He said, sure, I'm from Jerusalem. I'll take you. I say, brilliant. And I get into his cab. Jimmy Jamal was a great guide. In just over an hour that the journey took, maybe an hour and a half, he gave me 63 years of Palestinian history in 63 minutes. That's 1 year per minute. It's pretty good. I remember as we passed through Jerusalem and you go through the first barrier and then you're in the west, well, then you're in the Holy Land. Then you see the rolling hills of the countryside. And our road got a bit bumpy, but I looked up on a hillside and I was confused because there was a beautiful road with nobody on it. And I turned to my driver, Jimmy Jamal, and I said, I don't want to tell you your job, but why don't we use that road up there because nobody's on it and it looks like it's going in the same direction? He looked at me and said, you don't know much about this, do you? I said, no, tell me. He said, that road is for Jewish people only. If I take you on that road, we will be shot in 5 or 6 minutes. Shot dead. You want me to take you on that road? And he pretended to turn the car, and I went, no! I said, in my mind, this is apartheid. A road for Jews only? And if an Arab goes on it, you get shot dead? Then Jimmy Jamal said to me, the joke's on me as well, because being from Jerusalem, my taxes pay for that Jews-only road, and then I was sure it was apartheid. A little while later, we got to Columbia, and it was my first ever checkpoint, and the kid there was from Brooklyn in an Israeli uniform. Now, I didn't know that Brooklyn was a suburb of Tel Aviv, did you? This is amazing to me. He waved his gun casually at Jimmy Jamal and took his papers and chucked them back. And then he took my British passport and he said, hey, Britain, we love you guys. I felt ashamed. I couldn't quite put my finger on why. When we were there at Columbia, Jimmy Jamal said to me, you need to get out of the taxi now and walk through the checkpoint. And it was getting dark. And I was afraid. I said, you're just going to dump me here? He said, you don't know much about this, do you? He said, I've been given papers by the Israelis to say that I am from Jerusalem. I can never go to the West Bank. I can never, ever go to Gaza. That night, in my hotel room in Ramallah, I cried myself to sleep. And what had I seen? One apartheid road and one checkpoint. And brothers and sisters, I wish that was all it was. Anyway, the next day, I didn't manage. Somehow, I had been given an interview with Mahmoud Abbas on the day of the Palestinian elections. Can you imagine what a scoop that is? I'm a rookie reporter who knows nothing about the Middle East. They've got CNN, they've got ABC, and they've got Sky News, and he's seeing me. This is a miracle in itself. I have secured the biggest interview in the Middle East that day. Now, when you go to meet a world leader, you have to negotiate their security, right? You can't just go, hey, I'm meeting Barack Obama tomorrow, I'm just going to stroll up to him with a tape recorder. No. You have different circles of security. Of course, Mahmoud Abbas's security were Fatah security. That's the party. And they're Arabs, Palestinians. I remember very clearly being taken into a big metal elevator. We were going to go up one floor, and I was going to do the interview with Mahmoud Abbas. And beside me were two of the biggest Arabs you've ever seen outside Hollywood movies. 6'5" and 6'8". Both of them had what looked like automatic weapons to my eyes, and they had walkie-talkies. They took my bag, and they put it on a table. They took my phone, and they took it away. And I'm standing there, and they close the metal grid. One of the walkie-talkies goes, the giant Arab picks it up and goes, now, brothers and sisters, I do this with respect, but that is how Arabic sounds to English people. Have to understand this. And in my mind, I remember thinking very clearly, subtitle reads, "We'll kill the white woman later." And I was so scared because I realized I had Arabophobia. I had blindly and unknowingly absorbed all of the negative imagery that I had seen on the TV news and in the newspapers. I was in an elevator with Arabs, probably Muslims. They definitely had guns. Of course they were terrorists. And of course they wanted to kill the white woman because that's what these guys do. But you know what? They have a saying that a week's a long time in politics. I have to tell you that 3 days is a very, very long time in Palestine. And just 3 days later, my experiences changed my heart forever to those people in that place. And I realized 72 hours later I would give my life for any man, woman, or child that I met. Such was the love that I was shown, a stranger in the Holy Land. Let me give you an example. I didn't have my coat because the Israelis had kept all of my stuff. It took them like 3 days or 4 days to get it back to me. And I was walking around an area called Manar in Ramallah, and it was January and it was cold and rainy. And a little old lady looked at me like I was crazy, like, who's this crazy white woman with no coat? And she came and grabbed my hand and she said, "Yalla, yalla, yalla." And she took me into her little house. And she opened a wardrobe and she took out a coat and she put it on my back. She took out a little case. She put some jumpers in the case. She shut the case and handed it to me. And then without speaking a word of English, she wrote down her name and number in Arabic scriggles. She showed me to the door and said, "Salam alaikum." And I'm standing outside in the street going, what just happened? Is that normal around here? Yeah, it is. My heart was being softened gradually. Now, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a plan for you, you can go to the left or the right of that plan, but you will end up in the destination that has been written for you. It's called Qadr. It is written for you. And it seemed that I was definitely being led in a certain direction. In 2007, I was still writing for the Mail on Sunday, except now I lived in the south of France. I had 2 daughters and a very nice life. We had a swimming pool, we had a barn, we had an acre or so of land in rolling French countryside. We were living the dream. I had no business in the Muslim world, but it seems that the Muslim world had business with me. Because I suddenly got a phone call from a guy I'd never met called Muhammad Ali. Now, Muhammad Ali is Tunisian, and he has a beard down to his chest. Now, the only reason I bring that up is my Palestinian sisters will know that in Gaza, you talk about people by the length of their beard. So if, for example, you say, he said what? How long was his beard down to here? Oh, okay. So I'm just telling you, he has a beard down to here. True, the Palestinians know this. So he gives me a call, and I'm in London, and he says, we want to meet you. And he's the head of the Islam channel. I have no idea how he's even heard of me. I'm writing for a right-wing, anti-Muslim newspaper. All right, I don't write anti-Muslim things. By now I'm an activist for Palestine in a small, small way. But why has he heard of me? Allahu alam. We meet in a restaurant midweek, and he brings his head of programming with him. And I want to give you a snapshot now of who I was in 2007. A religious man sits opposite me in a restaurant with his head of programming, and the first thing I do is this: waiter, bottle of red wine, please. Do you think I didn't know that this might be offensive. I knew that Muslims didn't drink. I just didn't care. Because you see, I was in my home city. And this was my lunch hour. And I like to drink alcohol at lunch. And if you Muslims don't like it, bad luck. Yeah? Because it's my country. So there was a bit of that going on in my mind. That's who I was. Anyway, the wine came and I started to pour the glass. Muhammad Ali did this with his beard. He said, before you take a sip, I just want to say 2 things about this bottle of wine. I said, go ahead. He said, the first thing you need to know is that the Islam channel will not be paying for it. And the second thing you need to know is that I can't sit here while you drink it. It's against my religion. And he got up calmly and he left the table. Now, Muhammad Ali is a very clever guy. He's got a wicked sense of humor, as it turns out. I didn't know that at the time. But he could have sat at another table. Islamically, we live in this society. It's not so bad. It happens. But he didn't do that. He went outside the restaurant. And he stood in the cold London street, and where I could see him in the window, and he walked like this, watching me drink the wine on my own. And something happened inside me. I had a feeling that I hadn't had since I was about 12 years old. It was shame. I felt ashamed of myself. Why had I acted like that to a man of faith? Why had I been so rude? Why had I completely disrespected everything that he held dear so that I could drink some red liquid? What was wrong with me? When had I become this polluted person? I brushed it away. I told the waiter, take the wine away, and I motioned to Muhammad Ali, okay. And we began our meeting. And then he said something extraordinary. He said, we'd like to offer you a job at the Islam channel. I said, do what now? I said, you know I'm not Muslim, right? He said, yeah, we guessed. I said, okay. I said, and in my arrogance, I have 2 conditions before I consider any job at your little channel. First of all, please don't try to make me Muslim, because I'm never going to be Muslim. Now, I like you guys. God, I was patronizing. I like you guys, but it's not for me. Muhammad Ali looked at me and he said, Allah knows whether you will be Muslim or not. And you, my dear, you don't know. I said, you're wrong. I know, and your Allah doesn't know. He said, no. Allah knows and you don't know if you're going to be Muslim. I said, no, I know. He doesn't know. He said, he knows, you know. I said, okay, forget it. I said, look, the second thing is, don't even ask me to wear hijab, because I'm not going to be a hypocrite. If you want me on your program, I'm not going to do it in hijab, okay? He said, okay, don't wear hijab. Subhanallah. To my knowledge, to this day, I am still the only female presenter ever to have appeared on the Islam channel without hijab, and Allah is all-knowing and all-seeing. Now, what that job meant is this. For the next 2 years, from 2007 to 2009, I was sent around the globe interviewing some of the greatest academics, clerics, and activists in the Muslim world today. That was the interaction that I was having for my job. SubhanAllah, one of the men that I met had a real impact on me. His name is Sheikh Raed Salah. Sheikh Raed Salah. He is known as the Lion of Palestine. He is the leader of the Islamic movement in northern Israel and the guardian of Al-Aqsa Masjid. I met him at 1 a.m. in the morning in the foyer of a Copenhagen hotel after a conference on Palestinian prisoners. I didn't know who to expect. To me, it was going to be an interesting sheikh. And Sheikh Salah walks up to me like this. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And I think, this is the Lion of Palestine? He doesn't look like he can roar. Because you see, again, we've been blinded to what humility, what strength is, what power there is in humbleness. We don't see it anymore. If you're not brash and outspoken, you're weak. Big mistake. He sat down quietly, and over the next hour, you know, he never looked in my face. Now, as a Western journalist, I had been programmed to think that when an Arab man, a Muslim, doesn't look in your face, it's because you make him sick. Your kafir face makes him want to vomit. And if he looks in your eyes, he will have to scrub himself clean for a week. Such is the filth that you portray. This is kind of something that we're not directly told, but somehow it gets into us. Muslim men don't look at women because they hate women. But you know what? When Sheikh Salah sat there, I didn't feel he hated me. I felt what a lovely, dignified human being. And more, I knew he wasn't really even in the room with me, because most of him was somewhere else. And that somewhere else, I wanted to be. I can't describe it any better than that, brothers and sisters. And there was also, while he was speaking in Arabic, a feeling of fuzzy warmth that came over me that I now know as Iman. Alhamdulillah. Such things begin to move you. Now, I told you that I wasn't on a path. I wasn't in a spiritual frame of mind. In fact, I would describe myself wholly and utterly as a very happy sinner back then. Thank you very much. I wasn't in need of revamping, reevaluating, looking around, looking inward. No, I was cracking on with my life and my career, and there wasn't much room for spirituality at all. But you see, when Allah has a plan for you, you can go to the left and the right, but you will go in the direction of that plan. And so, despite the fact that I wasn't looking for Islam, I was still getting dawah over and over again. And I was getting dawah from a surprising source. Somalian taxi drivers in North London. May Allah bless the hidden army of Islam who drive minicabs around the world. Because I'm telling you right now, as I'm here speaking, in 20 or 30 cities, somebody's getting into a cab driven by a Somalian, and they're getting a lecture on Islam whether or not they want it. Subhanallah. I would get into these taxis, and I'd think I was being clever, because I knew how to say salam alaikum, because I'd been to the West Bank, right? So I'd say salam alaikum, and they'd say, wa alaikum salam, as the Prophet told his wife Aisha, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And for the next 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, however long I was in the cab, I would be getting hadith and Quran and ayah and all kinds of learning, whether or not I wanted it. And soon I found that I did want it. Sometimes I'd even say, is the driver going to be Somalian? And one other thing. Whenever I began to hear the name Muhammad, it felt like my heart would grow an extra size. I felt that I'd had a little brick for a heart for many years. But when his name was mentioned and I heard stories about his life, it was like a growth in my chest and a warmth. And I wanted to know him because he sounded great. He sounded amazing. Subhanallah, Allah tells us, love me, love my Prophet. To know me, know my Prophet. Now, it's these days, I do still get into Somalian taxi cabs. But now I get in and I'm clearly a sister in Islam. So I say very proudly to the Somalian brother, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And it's fascinating because these brothers all have the same question for me. They immediately ask the same question. Are you married? Are you married? No Quran, no Hadith, no ayah. Just, are you married? One day somebody will tell me why. I don't know. Alhamdulillah. I want to tell you now, if you don't mind, I'd like to tell you how I got my first ever copy of the Quran in English. This happened in 2006, actually. I went back to the West Bank. I had Palestinitis. It's actually a well-known, you can catch it from just being in Palestine. You want to go back time and time again. Activists talk about it. You have Gazaitis and Palestinitis. I definitely had it. So I was making excuses to go back. And I went back, and this time I went to Gaza, and I had a terrible experience. I had an experience of what it means to try and get through the Erez checkpoint. The Erez checkpoint, if you've seen any Nazi films from the Second World War, it's like trying to escape from one of those camps. Identical. And it's very frightening. You say Erez, even to the people of Gaza, and they don't frighten easily, and they stiffen. I was leaving Gaza through Erez, and it was 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning when I got there. And remember Jimmy Jamal, my driver? I rang him. I still had his number, and I rang him and said, "Hi, you probably don't remember me. It's Lauren Booth." He said, "Sister, you're back. Marvelous." I said, "You know what? Can you meet me around midday, 1 o'clock? I'm going through Erez." "No problem. No problem. Problem." Barking the car. Sorry, I always tease my friend Osama about barking. It was a very bad day. The Israelis were playing games with an old lady in a wheelchair. They seemed to think it was funny that this old lady who was 60 who had a lump on her spine, and she had booked her flight to come to America for an operation. They let her through to the very end of the checkpoint, and then they sent her back. And then they let her through, and then they sent her back until she missed her flight, until she was screaming in Arabic, "I'm not a terrorist, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? Ya Allah!" And we all stood there hopeless. Members of UNRWA, the UN, Palestinian members of parliament, all waiting at a checkpoint saying, "Ya Allah, what can we do?" And I didn't get through until 9 o'clock at night. And I was so tired, they actually made me cry. I hate that. I was so angry. You know when you're so angry, you're like, you can't do anything? And they made me cry. And I got through, and it was dark, and my phone was dead, and I looked around, and I was in a huge parking lot. And suddenly, a car came towards me, and it was Jamal. I said, "What on earth are you doing here? You waited here 10 hours? He said, "Sister, I couldn't leave. What if you were on your own?" Subhanallah. I cried so hard in his car, he was going to take me to hospital. He said, "I've never seen tears like this. Are you okay?" Instead, he took me to his wife, and she cooked me dinner, and I stayed there. And the next day, I was leaving, and I had 40 minutes only to get all of my souvenir shopping. And I was in the beautiful old streets of Jerusalem, Al-Quds. And I had my list, and I was grumpy. It was raining, and I was stressed. And suddenly a young man appeared next to me, and he did that, what I call the Palestinian bounce. You know, the shabab, the young men, they just bounce. Like this, they walk like this. And when they do the dubka in Gaza, they leave the ground this high. You can see it. They just go, "Wow, how did you do that?" It's amazing. So he bounced along next to me, and he said, "Marhabar." And I thought something mean. I thought, not today. Don't marhaba me right now. I thought, I've got no time. But you know, my brain said, don't you dare. Don't you dare disrespect a Palestinian in their own country. They've been nothing but lovely to you. Take a moment. What does it cost? I took a breath. I said, marhaba. He said, "What can I do for you today?" I said, "Look, I'm doing souvenir shopping." He said, "This is amazing. All of these men in the shops are my uncles. We can get you everything. What you want?" So I looked at the list, and I gave it to him, and the list was this. I wanted to get 2 stuffed toy camels for my daughters. Somebody had asked me for a mother-of-pearl portrait of Yasser Arafat. My husband wanted a ceremonial Arabic knife because he collected knives, and I wanted a Quran in English just to have a look. Just, see what all the fuss was about. In the next 40 minutes, we went in and out of all of the little shops in the souk in one of the old streets of Al-Quds, and we drank so much mint tea, I think I got diabetes. Seriously, even that tea tonight, what is the deal? It's so sweet. Subhanallah. 40 minutes later, I'm standing back in the rain on the streets of Al-Quds next to this young man who, by the way, I'd never seen before and I would never see again. And I said to him, how much do I owe you for all of these things? And he looked at me and said, sister, these are a gift from the people of Palestine to you. Please don't forget us when you go. And that's how I got my first Quran, as a gift from the people of Palestine to a visitor to Jerusalem. Subhanallah. When Allah has a plan for you, you can go to the left or the right, but you will go in the direction of that plan. And something was unfurling in my life over which I had no control. In 2008, I was sitting in my home office in France, and by this point my family were getting worried about my activism. So they were saying things like, look, just stop going on about Palestine in your columns, in your writing. Don't go on those marches. You're too visible. It'll destroy your career. They're not your people. It's not your land. It's not your faith. It's not your business. Just leave it alone. And I tried. You know what? I tried to leave Palestine alone. But then I got an email, and it was just 2 lines long, and it read this. Would you like to go to Gaza by boat? If so, call this number. I looked at it on my screen. Go to Gaza by boat? That was insane. Nobody could go to Gaza by boat. In 2008, I'm going to remind you, because being in America, you don't get this information. In 2008, Israel's illegal siege of Gaza was around 2 years old. What does a siege mean? It's a medieval thing. It means that you circle a civilian population and you starve them of the materials they need to thrive in order to get your political aims. That's what a siege means. In Gaza, there was no way in or out. The Israelis guarded Erez checkpoint. All around the rest of the land, it's only 24 miles long, is barbed wire and watchtowers. And at the other end was the Mubarak regime in Egypt, and they were cooperating with Israel. And then there's the sea. Gaza has a lovely coast. Now, under the Oslo Accords, the Palestinians were allowed to fish 24 nautical miles, I believe, 24 nautical miles of their own waters they can use for fishing. Nah, that doesn't happen. Right now, that's down to 2 nautical miles. And beyond 2 nautical miles is the hell of the Israeli Navy. And just last week, a little fishing boat from Gaza went out to 2.5 miles to try and get a few fish that weren't in sewage. And what did the Israelis do? What do they do routinely? They spray these ships with poisonous chemicals that smell like horse manure, and they make you vomit. Then they say, take your clothes off. And they make the fishermen strip. Then the fishermen are forced to jump into freezing cold water. Then they're made to climb on the enemy boats. Then they're beaten. Then they're taken into prison to be seen or not seen again, or they're shot dead. And their boats are taken. This is what a siege means. Understand this. Go to Gaza by boat, break the siege. I called the number. And a man answered it and said, hello, this is Osama. I thought, blimey, I'm not sure I want to go to Gaza by boat with Osama. That would be a bad career move, right? Alhamdulillah. It was a different Osama. It was the Osama who says barking. I went into my editor's office and I said, Peter, I want to go to Gaza by boat and break the siege. He said, here's enough expenses for 2 weeks. Take your time. You've got 4 pages of the magazine. And I remember leaving his office thinking, I think he's just trying to get rid of me. Late July, mid-July 2008, I flew to Cyprus and got on the Free Gaza, and there was another boat called the Liberty. And when I say boats, it's a very loose term. A little charity had been set up, and they'd taken donations on the internet, and they'd managed to buy 2 rust buckets, sold to them by some Greek fisherman who was going, and took tens of thousands of dollars for something you wouldn't even put on a little local lake. And we were going to go against the Israeli Navy, past the Israeli Navy to Gaza. 36 hours in these things. In fact, they were such bad boats that the Free Gaza, if you turned left, it went right. Greta Berlin from California, one of the founders of the Free Gaza movement, told me only a month ago, she said, Lauren, you do know that the steering wheel on the Free Gaza was on upside down. I said, Ya Allah, that makes a lot of sense. On the Liberty, if you plugged the fridge in, all of the electrics died. These were the boats. But you know what? Those 46 human beings were the greatest human beings I've ever met. None of us were Muslim. We just couldn't live another day in a world where 1.8 million people were being persecuted. 800,000 children denied the right to education, freedom to leave their country and to come back into safety. So we got on the boats. And we hid for a month in little islands around Greece. There's a book about it called Sailing for Freedom. I recommend it. We were hiding from Mossad. We'd sail into a little Greek village, and they'd say, you have 2 hours, they're coming, go! It was like some crazy adventure. And it was scary. On the day that we left, on August the 22nd, 2008, from Larnaca, we had Cypriot frogmen go underneath the boats checking for bombs. It was a very real risk of death. We all wrote our wills. I said goodbye to my daughters. And then we set sail. And at midday, on the 23rd of August 2008, our Irish skipperman climbed the mast and he said the words I'll never forget. He said, land ahoy. And there it was. There was beautiful Gaza rising up out of the mist. And as we got closer, we saw dots on the horizon, and we couldn't understand what the dots were. And you'll see photos of us, and we're doing this. And when we got a bit closer, we saw the dots were people. Thousands and thousands of people had waited for our arrival. Palestinian men had slept on the beach for 3 days, listening to the radio going, is it true? Are these crazy Europeans and Americans really trying to come and see us? Are people who aren't our enemy actually going to land on this beach? And as we got closer, a wall of sound hit us. And it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. And it was this, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. It was the best day of my life. Now, we were only supposed to stay 3 or 4 days, look around, try to get the media interested in the siege, and then leave by the boats, because we were illegal in Gaza. It's a very serious situation. We had no permits from Israel or Egypt to be there. We were illegal. And I can't tell you why I did what I did next. I watched the boats leave and I didn't get on them. I stood on the port of Gaza as my only route back to my children left. And something inside me said, don't get on the boats. Now, it would take me 30 days and nights of begging everybody I knew in the international community to get me out of Gaza. But during the next 30 days and nights, I visited the refugee camps. I saw the Bedouins. I went to Bayat Hanun. I went to every little area that I could, and I sat with the people. And what month was it? It was Ramadan. Thanks be to Allah for allowing me to spend Ramadan in Gaza with the most beautiful people alive in the Ummah today, the oppressed people of Palestine, and I was allowed to be there, subhanAllah. One night, I was taking meat to a very poor family in a place you've heard of, Rafah. Remember that place that impacted me? I was there, I was in the TV, I was in the photo. And I was taking meat to a poor family, and as I knocked on this little door in a refugee camp, the doorway was more bullet holes than plaster. A lady opened it like this. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Fadal. Welcome. This lady was full of light. That's the only explanation I can give you. Everything about her shone. Her eyes gleamed. Her skin was bright. Her smile was so beautiful it would melt your heart. And I now know that that light is Nur. It was Ramadan, and this humble mother of Rafah was filled with the Nur of faith. But when I looked at her, I thought, yeah, she can't be poor. You can't be poor and that happy. She must be rich. I bet behind that door, it's like Aladdin's cave. Yeah. She's not poor like everybody else around here. She's happy because they're kind of hiding, they're hiding money, wealth. Maybe everything inside there is gold. She's that happy. Maybe she's living in a gold room. And I walked past her into what? Into a cement room with nothing in it at all. An empty room with just one rug on the floor. And the only other thing in that room were some old mattresses lined against the walls that would be pulled down at night for 15 men, women, and children to sleep on together. I started to feel an anger rising in me. I was sick of hearing about Islam. I was sick of how the people of Gaza were suffering as I saw it in Ramadan. They were already hungry. Why were they fasting? It made no sense to me. And for the first time, I felt real anger at Islam. And I said to this mother of Rafah, why do you fast? Why do you fast in Ramadan? You say that your God loves you, so you do without meat. I say you're hungry every day. So what? You say that you do without water in Ramadan for God, but I say you always have dirty water. So what? And this mother of Rafah looked at me and she said, I fast in Ramadan to remember the poor. Subhanallah. The poorest woman I'd ever seen didn't know that she was poor. And a key went into my heart, and the words came into my head, if this is Islam, I want to be Muslim. If this gratitude for whatever you have in the day is Islam, I want to be Muslim. If this love of God and humility before Him, if this is actually Islam, I want to be Muslim. And if this love for your fellow man, if that is Islam, I want to be Muslim. Subhanallah. But Allah calls us the forgetful in the Quran. He says time and time again, O mankind, I give you signs and you forget. I give you messages and you forget. And so I left that refugee camp and I forgot all about Allah. But you know what is beautiful? He never forgot about me. He never forgot about me. And you know what? He never forgets about you either. No matter how far you go from the past, you still get the chance to be guided every single day. And don't miss those chances. 2 years later, it was Ramadan again, and I went into a masjid, and I was in wudu. And as I sat down, I felt a peace descend upon me that was nothing like I'd ever felt before. And 7 days later, I went into a masjid in London, and I said, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and I became Muslim. Alhamdulillah. And that's my story. And every day since has been a test or a blessing, but mostly you can see the blessing in everything if you look. And I am grateful and humbled to be here as your sister. And I ask Allah to forgive me for any errors that I've made here this evening in my speech. And any good feeling you have tonight is from God. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.